Hi, I'm Geraldine Glass, and welcome to the Sacred Science of Sound. I am delighted to have Lee Harris with us today. Lee is a channeler, an intuitive, and he's built an incredible community and circle of people worldwide with Lee Harris energy. And he's working to change the vibrational frequency in people's hearts and people's souls. And I'm excited to have Lee here. He's also a musician. Lee is from England, and he has moved to my home state, to California. And Lee has been evacuated from his home due to the fires. And so he's in a safe place, and we welcome him to the Sacred Science of Sound.
Thank you for having me. It's really, really special to be here. And like I was saying to you when we first talked about this, I love that you're doing this. I think this is so needed, something that is so sound focused. So thank you.
Yes, and I love when you said your title, Sound of the Soul. And I love what you're doing also in your retreats with sound healing and bringing your own musical gifts now into this healing world. Please tell us a little bit about what you're doing, how you integrate sound, and what does sound mean to you?
Well, if I can, I'll start with what sound means to me, and then I'll talk about why it was so important in the work. So when I was a kid, I was very sensitive, highly sensitive, but I didn't know I was, and neither did anyone around me. So for me, music was one of my safe places in the world, and it was the language that I understood. So I would escape into music, and music would be a place where I could feel things safely, where my energy would move in response to what I was hearing. And so it became both a refuge and a teacher, because I always felt that there was this incredible intelligence in the music, but I don't know if I could have articulated that at the time, but music to me was food. And so as a kid, I was passionate about singing and singing songs and being in musicals and in theater as a kid and all of that. But I didn't actually start creating music, and nor did I ever expect to until I was 21. And it happened, it was like a light bulb went off. Someone showed me a couple of chords on the guitar because I thought, wouldn't it be great to learn to play an instrument enough that I could accompany myself? That would be great. And literally they showed me 3 chords on the guitar, and I learned those 3 chords, and then I immediately wrote my first song, and I just heard it. I heard the melody, I heard the lyrics, and I now look back and see that it was a channeled experience. And funnily enough, it was a year later that I heard the voice of my guides. So this 21 to 22 period in my life, like the lights were going off, and I'd managed to heal enough stuff at that point. I had a pretty tricky teenage years. I was very overweight. I was taken to Weight Watchers at the age of 10, which was a manifestation of me trying to comfort my sensitivity or suppress or stuff my sensitivity with food. And then I really peaked in weight by the age of 16. And I was a smaller body, a smaller frame, a smaller height, but I managed to lose 60 pounds between the ages of 16 and 18. And I always see that as the beginning of my awakening. Because when I was 18, 19, I went through such a personality shift. I didn't lose all of my fear. I didn't lose all of my insecurity, but I went through a big personality shift that was the beginning of being able to find my path out and my path through. And I really looked into metaphysics, personal growth, and the music happened about 3 years into that journey. So fast forward to now, and I've been working as an energy intuitive and a channeler with people for 14 and a half years right now. I never thought this would be my job. I spent my 20s trying to break into the music industry with singer-songwriter albums that would have probably gone into the alternative pop genre. And I was always trying to kind of see if I could make that light. And it, you know, there was a small following for what I did, but it wasn't enough to make it my job. And so ironically, this other job that I never anticipated kind of blew up around me. I started giving readings at the advice of a friend. And 14 years later now, I work with people on their levels of empathy, their levels of sensitivity, developing their intuition. Where do you want to go next in life? And what is the energetic, emotional, and psychological process that we go through as we heal? And I love it because that has been my need. You know, I think if I'd known some of the stuff that I have now learned to adopt into my daily life, I wouldn't have suffered as a teenager the way that I did. So I'm a big believer of we teach what we know and we teach what we need to be in as a field. That's the medicine for us too. So when I began doing live events many years ago, it would often be very much me in a room, but I would always bring some kind of music speaker so that I could play some music at certain moments, because I knew the power of music to get people into their soul, into their feeling, even if the words or the concepts or what was being presented otherwise wasn't doing it. So 4 years ago now, I was able to bring in live sound healers, and I would bring in my dear friend Davor Bozik if it was in Europe, and I would bring in my friend Narada Wise if it was anywhere in America or Canada. And I would have them drum or play gongs or crystal bowls or anything underneath our sessions. So when I channel, and it's a channeled message from my guides, we always have music underneath. But I decided to also bring them into what you might call the more therapy sessions, the more group process sessions, because I knew that if we kept a current of musical energy running through the room, it was going to help people's healing spiral move a lot faster than if it was just talk based. And that has been incredible. And it's interesting because so many people, especially back then, would comment on how powerful that was for them. And I'm happy to see that a group of us have been doing more of that over recent years. And I think it's the medicine we need, because we are multidimensional. Music is a multidimensional language to me. It has never been a linear language, unlike words can be solely linear if you want to use them in that way, but music is always multidimensional. So for me, bringing that energy into the room is the power that really for me would clean and heal and uplift my own cells, and watching that movement happen in other people's bodies while they're focusing on learning something is very powerful.
Indeed. Music it's a container. It somehow it elevates.
Yeah.
Whether you go to a beautiful classical music concert or whether you're hearing music in a certain frequency. But I'm just enamored also simply with the tone and the warmth in your voice, in your speaking voice. Your speaking voice has its own melody and music and calmness to it. It's beautiful to hear.
Thank you. Well, same with you. And isn't that interesting? Because I'd never really understood how important our voices are until, I understood it perhaps with coming from a background in theatre. They would have a very specific idea about voice training. But it was only really when I started looking into the healing work that, my guides would say, we're giving you a channeled message and there are words, and some of you need and will use the words, but it's the frequency of the sound that you are actually absorbing and that contains the medicine and the elevation. And they would talk about our voices and how our voices heal. And that's so true, isn't it? Because you can have such a response to somebody's voice. You meet them and it's almost like if they are a jigsaw piece for your frequency, you very quickly let them in based on the voice. And this is where I think our sensory nature has, for most of us, not been something we were guided through when we were younger. And certainly I don't think collectively in the Western world, we certainly see the evidence of how our sensory nature was scrubbed out. And I think that's why music has remained popular through this time, because it's one of the true frequencies. And so yeah, I I hear you on the voice thing. It's a very, it rearranges people, doesn't it? How we hear each other's voices, and whose voice is right for us and whose isn't.
It's really the language of the soul. It's really the language, the frequency of the authentic self. It's very unique. Just like all the bowls have their own very unique sound and overtones, it's the same with the human voice. I'm excited that you are a musician and are doing the amazing work you're doing. I'm curious about your guides and about the channeling, and I'm curious about what we're experiencing now, especially in California, and the fact that you were evacuated out of your home. What do you think that's about, Lee? Because there's so many catastrophic events now in the world. I mean, I guess there always has been, but what do you think about that? What are the guides revealing to you?
Well, one of the things that they shared, and this was in early 2017, so for many years they have been talking about this period that we're in. And I remember years and years ago completely misinterpreting it. They would say, oh, you're going to see in this period of time, people are going to be very much in their feelings. And, the thing with channeling is you have to ask multiple questions. You can't just stop at what you hear first. It's always a deeper layer. And I was thinking, oh, great, everybody's going to be hugging. And, and actually, of course, the truth is, and I've talked about this in my monthly energy update videos that are free on YouTube and on Facebook, that the reason the feeling is so high right now is because everything is falling apart in order to transform. And I think sometimes we hear everything is falling apart and we think everything is falling apart. And the truth is that what I just experienced in the fire is what elevated was community, love, helping each other. And it's interesting, a friend who didn't evacuate and chose to stay behind to save the property that he works for, he said that in the 3 or 4 days where there were no phones, no cell phones, he said everybody was looking each other in the eye. And he said it was amazing. He said it was such a different sense of connectedness. And then as soon as the cell reception came back, it started to change and people were living through their phones again. And I thought that was interesting. I'm not making a judgment one way or another, but what I can say about the guides and their talk about this time, they said 2017 to 2024 would be challenging years. They did say that people who identify as light workers, healers, people who have known about this transformation, they said it would be a very abundant time for those people, even if and as there was tragedy or difficulty going on around them or even affecting us directly. They said there will be an abundance of connection for you, feeling, and a sense that life is more alive. And what I can tell you about the day I was evacuating, and it was very sudden, I didn't see it coming. I say I didn't see it coming. The day before, I started to get concerned I was going to be depressed this weekend, which was really odd because I was thinking that Stephen was going away on a trip. I was going to be alone for a few days with the cats. I deliberately had not made any plans, which isn't that like me. Normally I would think, great, this is an opportunity to see people. I had this foreboding feeling about the weekend. And I started thinking, wow, am I going to be depressed this weekend? And I was like, well, that seems really, I couldn't put that together. But then the very next morning, I'm driving through black and orange clouds, a darkened sky at 10:30 a.m. in the morning, ash falling on the car, smoke in the car, worried about the cats because they've stopped meowing. Now the smoke's come into the car. And they were fine because the smoke only lasted about 20 minutes maybe, and I turned all the, the aircon and everything off. But what I learned in that moment is you figure it out moment to moment, and you don't really know what you're doing because there is nothing to hold on to that's a plan or a structure. And the cell phone won't work, and you're not sure you're going to get through this road, and you pull over, you see a police officer who's helping a few other people, and cars are driving a little kamikaze on the roads I was on because it's, this looks like you're driving into the apocalypse. And the police officer says, I think you'll get through. And you go, okay, well, I can't go that way. I think we'll get through. You figure it out, and you also feel incredibly alive. And my biggest takeaway from it, because we got to the other side. If we'd been an hour or two later, it might have been a different story, but people were so helpful, and you pay attention to what other people are doing. You follow, what's that car doing? And you find your way through. And it made me realize that sometimes fear tells us a story about a tragedy that is way worse than when you're in it. And I'm not talking about, I've got friends who've lost loved ones, family members. There is a grief with that that's true, that can't be avoided or taken away. But that when people tend to think of, oh, the world's going to fall apart a bit, or, oh, what if there's climate change? People go into the worst, darkest, most disabled story. And what I learned very experientially last week was, oh, you figure it out, and you do what needs to be done, and you don't go into a collapsed state of fear. You go into an energy of movement and an energy of alignment with what is, and you run with it. So it was interesting for me, because my takeaway from that, and what I want to share with anybody watching, is I was literally driving through the flames, and I was like, oh, this is what they're talking about. And I'm not wishing a fire on everybody, and I don't think everybody will go through a fire in the next 7 years. It won't look like a climate disaster for everybody. It will look like other things. But for me, it was a surprise. It wasn't something I was anticipating. And I felt very grateful that we were able to figure it out. Our house didn't burn down, so we had the moment of relief, because we really thought it would. And then, of course, minutes later, you learn of your friends who's dead. And it's like, oh, God, so but the community is going to rebuild, and we're all learning something new from it. So that's my takeaway.
I mean, what you're describing is a deep sense of a rootedness of trust, that you're suddenly in a situation and no experience, no knowledge of what to do, but you're in it, you're present, and you're moving forward with the energy of what is, and there's trust. There's an innate trust.
Yes, and I will say there are moments of fear too. So there's definitely moments where your mind goes, what if? But what I noticed was they weren't dominant. They would rise up, but because action was what was required, whether it was adrenaline that was driving me, and having two cats to protect, I'd be curious what I'd be like if I was on my own. I might be exactly the same, but there was the protective energy in me as well. I wanted to get these cats to safety. So trust, and those ping pong moments of, wow, this is new. I have no frame of reference for this. I can't contact anyone. Intermittent messages on the cell phone, which was how I got the message from my friend to turn around the other way and come to my house in Montecito. So, which made me laugh the next day, because Montecito was not a safe place 1 year earlier. And I was in Montecito, and everything looked kind of normal in Montecito. And that was the oddest thing too. It was like there were these pockets of upheaval going on all across the planet, and they're changing the structure of not just the people in that community, but it emanates out. So I think vibrationally, some of these more dramatic experiences we're having, whether they are nature-based or whether they are structural, government stuff, banking stuff, whatever it is, it's waking us and shaking us into a new way of being. And the one thing that the guides did talk about, they've always maintained that we will absolutely make it, and it will absolutely be a transformation. And they have said, the question is, how messy does it need to get? And I think whenever I have shared that with people, I felt like fear in the room. And the reason I share it is to then talk to that fear and say, there's no point having anticipatory fear about something we don't know, because the other thing they've said is it's not quite going to look the way that some of you think it is. So even those people who hear about quote unquote agendas on the planet, they can't hold, because things have changed so fast. those agendas are not able to be stable if they are agendas that were built 10, 20 years ago. So I think it's a tricky time where fear is concerned, because there are so many different opinions. And in the spiritual community, you'll see people at war about what the transformation is or isn't. And I think the most important thing for all of us is to keep coming back to allowing ourselves to rebirth and giving ourselves the time that we need to personally rebirth as we shift from a very old paradigm into a new one, which, as we know, is a balancing act for most of us. Most people don't pop into awakening overnight. For most of us, it's oh, I've just upgraded my feelings around abundance, and now I need to go back and look at that childhood piece and tidy that up a little bit more. Oh, now I go over here and I feel more in purpose than ever. Oh, now I need to go and look at relationship. And I think the more comfortable we get with that dance, which we weren't trained to be, we were taught to avoid the tricky stuff, most of us anyway, then things really start moving and start harmonizing, and it does actually get easier.
Lee, would you mind to talk a little bit to us about empath? What does that mean? And so a lot of the themes on the series have been about that, about very sensitive beings, and that music and sound has been a way for them to ground, to come into their own true purpose in life and recognize what that is, somehow through sound. Would you talk a little bit about the sound of the soul and about this feeling of being an empath and very sensitive as a young person?
That's great. I love that the empath's journey has come up so much in this.
Yeah.
A couple of different, it's funny, I was thinking about this. All of the sounds that we're surrounded by as a baby before we're born, when we're in the womb, and how our world is sound. And I studied child language acquisition when I was 16 years old as part of my English language course. We could choose things, and I found that really fascinating, that children produce sounds before they produce words. Mm-hmm. And they mimic the sounds they're hearing before they can actually form the words. And the words are the last things. But the sound is a way that they communicate and express. And if you think of how free kids are with their sounds, especially when they're young, they're not worried about whether someone likes their scream, doesn't like their scream, is laughing at their laugh. That kicks in when they get a bit more self-conscious. And usually that doesn't happen until 1.5, 2. But for most kids, that expression of sound is so primal and real. And then they learn language, and they learn the rules of language, and they learn to, and I think language is beautiful. I'm not dissing language, but there can also be a constraint for some people who don't really identify with language or words, or that's not really their area. So to kind of come full circle to your question, for me, the empath is a very sensory person, and that can run the gamut. So some empaths are the kind of people that they will walk into a room, and if they're visiting 4 people in that room and there's an argument going on, they're going to start to somatize those feelings in their own body. They're going to start to feel conflict in their own body, or they're going to start to become conflict in their own body. So the most extreme empath can channel the energies or emotions that are around them. And that's tricky. That's not a fun place to be unless you know how to turn it on and off. And that's where a lot of empaths can suffer, because they don't realize that the energy of the room is affecting them in a way that's pushing them off balance. Then there is the more normal, or the more common, should I say, kind of empath, which is those of us who don't necessarily run it all through our central system. We don't somatize other people's illnesses, because that's another form with the very extreme level of empaths, but we do sense everything. And we may do many things to try and turn that off. You know, my thing was food and trying to suppress, and because it was too much, it was too raw, and I didn't know how to filter it. But for example, this empath walks into a room where there's conflict. The conflict isn't being talked about because everyone else is talking about the weather. but they can feel that the bodies are off, or they feel there's an energy in the room that's kind of intense, that's heavy, that's dense. So a lot of empaths become healers. They're like, oh, I could clean this up. So really, we're no different to, we're cleaners in a way. What we do is we go into the room of another person or the group and go, oh, I can help tidy this a little bit up. Oh, would you just lift your legs here and I'll just hoover underneath there and that's going to feel better. And we may do it through music. We may do it through direct healing. We may do body work. It's like you said, there are certain frequencies that a person's voice has. The empath who isn't being held hostage by life, that very first description I gave, the empath who isn't hostage to everyone else's emotions and senses, or the empath who has worked out how to not be hostage, they'll often work with energy because it's one of their skills. And through doing that, they help people be more conscious of what they're feeling. So a good example here is, I'll give you an example of Adele, the British singer-songwriter who I think is fabulous. I think she's fabulous not just because I so enjoy her voice and her music, but actually who she is and the way she presents herself is a breath of fresh air in the music industry. So I think that's why she's been very healing for the world, because of her openness, how disarming she is, and how honest she is in what used to be a much more, shall we say, hidden or shallow or smoke and mirrors industry. She is giving people an experience of their feelings at their concerts who might never go to a therapist, might be anti-spirituality, so many things, but they go to that concert, and for whatever reason, when she sings Someone Like You, her tragic love song, everybody starts thinking about their ex or starts hugging she's moving energy. She's through her voice and her music, she's working as an empath. She tapped into something, not consciously, she just tapped into a raw nerve at the right time in society, and it became society's healing anthem for heartbreak and for tragic breakups and for love. And so an empath is somebody who can help people feel their stuff. And it's also the kind of, if you'll know you're an empath, if you're the kind of person that you're at a party or a wedding and everybody's coming up to talk to you about their feelings. They go, oh, I'm telling you things I never normally tell other people. And that used to happen to me a lot. Now I choose when that happens and when that doesn't, based on my own energy and availability. Because one of the things you have to learn to do as an empath is own yourself. Most of us who were empaths didn't own ourselves. It's often why empaths are attracted to narcissists, because narcissists, people with high degrees of narcissistic personality disorder, which we all have some narcissism, we all have some empathy, but there are those who are way up the scale. One of the things that I talked about in a course that I did called Empaths versus Narcissists about that power dynamic is the empath is attracted to the narcissist's sense of self because the empath doesn't have one. The empath's sense of self might have been borrowed and built on their merging and their feeling with everybody else, which would be beautiful if everybody else was loving and open-hearted and you could all connect. And but because that isn't the map of the world at this time, the empath has taken some hits, had some bruises, and usually has to go through a real deep journey of self-healing to get themselves back before they start deciding what they want to do with this gift of empathy that they have and how they want to use it. I hope that makes sense. I went around a few different houses there, but I hope that was clear.
Very much so. And what kind of tools are you giving in your workshops or when you work with your groups? What kind of tools might you share with the audience, with our viewers, in terms of just these subjects that we're talking about?
Well, it's funny. I mean, there are many different things that we do, and with the workshops, they're a group-based process. So a lot of the medicine gets revealed by who comes and what we look at each time. But one thing comes to mind immediately, which is eye contact. Eye contact's a beautiful thing. And I even do an exercise in my workshop where people hold eye contact with each other for about 20, 25 minutes while music plays. And there's a Indian eye meditation is where it originally came from. There's a way that I use it to help empaths trust that they can. Eye contact is a really useful thing if you are a highly empathic person who hasn't yet figured out your boundaries and hasn't yet figured out how to not be consumed by other people. So the example here is, let's say I'm sitting next to you at dinner, let's say, and it's clear that I'm very hungry and I'm needy for something. And you, because you've had a really long week, Geraldine, you've been working, healing with people, you came out for what you thought was going to be a social dinner, but I'm sat next to you and I'm like, oh my God, this is great. She's a healer and she does bowls. And, you know, I clearly, you're laughing because you know it, right? I clearly need some kind of therapy, some kind of workshop. I clearly need to be doing some work on myself. But, you know, to be fair, I don't know. I'm not aware of that. That's not really the world I'm in. I haven't been exposed to it. So I decide that you're my healer, Geraldine. And I'm like, oh, Geraldine, oh my God. And then this thing happened and oh my God. And it all just starts unraveling. And you're sitting there eating your salad going, oh, I came here to try and recover. And one of the things I teach is that it's okay to have, and not only okay, it's vital that you have a no for you. And it's not always appropriate, I learned this the hard way, to be direct to a person and to just say, oh, Lee, I'm sorry. Hey, I'm sorry you're going through stuff right now, but you know, I've had a really long day and I just came here for some fun. So would you mind if we talked about something else? Would you mind if we just changed the subject? I'm sorry, you know, and I'm happy to maybe talk about it tomorrow, or I could recommend some books or some videos. Sometimes that works beautifully. And the person, especially if they're like a soul friend or someone that they go, oh yeah, God, of course, yeah. You know, then people can gather themselves back up, but some people can't. Or their desperation and their need has come out so much, either because it's them or because your energy field has been a resonance for them and out it comes. So one of the things I teach is to break eye contact as a way of breaking that hook connection. Because I've had this in my life many times where someone comes up and they lock your eyes and they just, oh, Geraldine, oh my God, oh, and then this happened, and they're not even listening to what they're saying. So they're kind of stuck, and no healing is going to happen unless we're in like a formal session where they're going to let you pull them around a little bit. So what I would do as the listener is, you're going, oh, Geraldine, da da da. I, as Geraldine, will go, oh, yeah, interesting. Oh, right, yeah. Huh, right. And you fake that at first because it's not natural to you to look away, but it's a way to test your feeling. It gives you a moment to look away from Lee's eyes and go, wow, I'm listening. He definitely, wow, okay, oh yeah, this is intense in my body. Okay, Lee, yeah, okay. I'm gonna need to break this. So that's just one small thing that I've learned can be helpful in a situation where it's a mismatch in somebody trying to hook onto your energy, either because it's the wrong time, or you can tell you're not going to be the medicine for them, but they think you are, and they want to just recycle a story for 40 minutes. And you test that by offering to help them transform the story, and they fight you on it. They go, oh no, Geraldine, no, he was a very bad man. And you're like, oh, okay, that's where you want to be, but I can't be your hostage there. I can't be the person that you feed this story into, because you need to feed the story and you need someone's attention to do it. So empaths can struggle with that, and so did I. And what I learned was, if it's someone I don't really know, or someone it's not appropriate to have that kind of conversation with, I just look away and I listen, because they don't know that I give eye contact when I listen, because everyone's a bit different. They don't know me, and they're not very interested anyway in what I'm doing. They're just trying to hook me. So empaths have to find ways to be able to be themselves and be present and have what I call the introvert time when they need the introvert time, so that they can be the extrovert when they are engaged and in community. And that's why empaths tend to love things like music concerts, spiritual gatherings, because the heart frequency goes up. So it's a lot easier to exist there for an empath. The hardest part for empaths is lack of love, lack of heart. And that's usually an area that we've all been wounded on the planet, you know, whether it was a parent or a family member or, you know, repetitive heartbreak in love relationships. Empaths want things to be high frequency, high love. And I find that you really hit your power as an empath when you accept that that's not how the planet is all the time. But you also have tools that can help you navigate there as much of the time as possible and be a generator of that energy for others when it's your turn to be the generator and not the receiver. And
you're also talking about learning the ability to turn that heightened sense of love to oneself so that you can make in that moment a healthy boundary and say no with kindness and have that vibration of love turn into yourself, which it sounds like the empath is often focused outward. Yes, and that can be really tricky. And there are some empaths I've met who are the other way around, but the majority tend to be focused outward. There are those who are empathic and very introverted, and they're often the ones who we described at the beginning who are running all the energy through the body, and they actually need to learn to step out of themselves a little bit more and drive their life rather than being driven by everybody else. So it's a fascinating topic, and we're all slightly different in it. But I find it really interesting as a path of life to be empathic. Lee, would you speak for a moment about heaven, earth? What does that mean to you, and how is sound and the healing power of music and sound vibration a part of that? Can you just say what you said again at the beginning? I heard the word earth, but I didn't hear the word before. Heaven. Aha. I thought that's what you were saying. Heaven, earth. And of course, that's what lives in my heart with the connection with my son from the other side now, and the connection through vibration, through frequency, through music. Just as you were talking about Adele bringing this kind of consciousness with her music and her voice, I'm curious what the guides have to say about this connection, heaven, earth, and the connection through sound. It's funny because probably like many people who are watching these interviews, my experience is that it's so joyous to be in the energy of music, to be in the energy of channeling, high frequency gatherings, people who are connected, people who are loving. I could live in that. But like many, I'm sure here, my guides said to me something that was very helpful. About 5 years ago, they said, you walk between the worlds, and that's often an awkward path for a human being. They said, on the one hand, you have the glory of the light. And on the other hand, you have the reality of the pain body of Earth itself. And they were saying that even though Gaia, I believe, can we retake this answer in a second? Because I think there's something to do. 1 second, let me just see who that is. Hang on. Oh, hi. Yeah. How are you today? Good, how are you? I'm your house speaker, and then do you want to Thank you. Maybe 2 hours, is that good? 11 o'clock. 11:30. Thank you. Okay, that's great. Thanks so much. It's so funny, we don't have a do not disturb sign, and I thought to myself last night, oh, I should ask for one for tomorrow, but anyway, completely forgot. Okay, we might have to start that whole thing again. Sorry, Geraldine. That's all right. So let's, that's at 39 minutes. Well, I'd like to ask you about the connection, heaven and earth, the connection through sound, through vibration, through frequency, through music. What does that mean to you, Lee? Well, music has always been a reset for me. So if I'm feeling a little off or a little emotional, I can play music and everything will reset for me, provided I choose the right kind of music. Sometimes, yes. Sometimes you're like, okay, the dancey music needs to go down now. I need to calm, and I mostly like calming music, unless I'm at an ecstatic dance or
or something, or I want some fun in the house, but I mostly like music that really has a space and soothes. And the heaven earth connection for me, it's interesting. The Z's who I channel many years ago gave me a very helpful frame of reference, which I think many of the people watching this will identify with. They said, you walk between the worlds, which is a very tricky place for a human being. They said, on the one hand, you have the glory of the light, which I would identify as heaven. And on the other hand, you have the pain of the earth as much as the beauty of the earth. And for me, the pain of the earth isn't so much in the land, it's really in the human population. I don't experience pain or suffering in the same way in the animal kingdom or in nature than I see and experience it within us as a human society, which could just be the way I'm slanted. That might be my area. So for me, music, meditation, open-hearted gatherings, channeling, any of that stuff brings us back to a frequency that is actually, I won't say it's hard to embody on this earth, but I think it has to constantly be fed. That's why I think our work is never done. It's no different to the fact that we all eat and drink every single day, and then we eliminate what we've eaten and drunk, and then we go on again. I think it's the same with the light. And I remember the Z's said, you can be a heart gardener for others as a healer. And I thought that term really stood out to me. You can be a heart gardener for others. You help other people help their own hearts bloom and weed. And through that process, you get to see more heart energy on earth. So for me, the heaven earth connection is that heaven is our home and earth is where we're visiting for a while. And of course, earth is our home too, and in the human way, but I feel that the energy of heaven is what we're all cultivating and bringing down as much as we can to seed a very new energy on the earth among humanity. And that to me feels important. So
Beautiful. Feel the same. It's somehow, though, with what we talked about with the fires, the natural disasters, with the shootings, with the political situation, we sometimes just ask ourselves, okay, what is this about? How am I called to wake up? What is my part in all of this? What do your guides speak to you about this?
Well,
a big subject.
Yeah, and I'm just going to sit for a second because I want to make sure I give it the space and time it needs. It's hard to boil down, but I'll give you my understanding of it in response to your question today. There are so many good things that we have done as humans that we are building into the future foundations. And so it's important that we don't forget that, because I can see a very negative slant go across even the spiritual communities. People get very angry about certain things. And the truth is, anger is anger. Anger contains judgment, resentment, and it's when we're closed down. And I don't think that anger in and of itself is a force that we should demonize, because it's an energy that moves through us all, and it can, if it's naturally allowed to just be there, it's a sign. It's like, oh, I'm frustrated. It's when we become those lower states of emotion and we adopt them as more dominant parts of us that we start to see a more distorted humanity happening. And so I feel the period of history we're in is taking all of our distortions, looking at them personally, upgrading them very, very fast, often through these experiences like the fires or anything else that's going on around the world that doesn't seem to make sense to people's minds versus history. Because that was one thing that Aziz said several years ago. They said, there is nothing in your DNA that prepares any of you for this. There's nothing in your codes that you are experiencing now a whole new time. And so if you think about that, it makes sense to me that we would all have to go through some things that we've never been through before, not just personally, but collectively as a society. And I see a lot of us have gone through that maybe for the last 15, 20 years. People who've been on the awakening path for a while have got a little bit used to this dance that you go through in yourself when you're going through a growth phase. And now we're seeing it collectively. So you, the viewer, or you, Geraldine, or me, Lee, we are the people that when someone else is freaking out, and I've seen it this week, even with people who didn't lose their homes in the fires. I've seen members of my community on a neighborhood website being angry. Why weren't the police there? Well, immediately, all their grief, which we all had grief, we all had shock, we all had a, whoa, what's going on? Because you can't get away from that. You can't meditate that away. You can do things to support and soothe that, but you can't expect that to be gone. They projected all of their emotion out onto blame, judgment, anger. And then there were lots of other voices on that website, community voices who tried to help soothe people. And I think it's also understanding they're going through very real emotions, maybe they've never gone through before. And so as they're in an inner explosion, they want to find fault. It's no different to the propaganda that we see around war. Oh, this terrorist blew this thing up, so now we'd like let's go over to this country and kill everybody. It's the same base, tiny mentality that we have been trained to go with as a society or not question. And we're in a period now where all of that's been questioned. So it's very uncomfortable because nobody really knows who's in charge anymore. You don't always feel you want to be in charge all the time yourself. You know, there's something about sovereignty that's pretty overwhelming for all of us, I feel. So we're doing it step by step, piece by piece. We're growing, we're changing. Ourselves are becoming something new. And then we as a society, it's happening all around us too in incremental phases. So that to me is the experience of what we're in. Where it's taking us, I don't know. But what I will tell you is just last couple of weeks ago in Costa Rica, there was a channel which we will be releasing in a couple of months into the portal, my members club. They talked about the years 2022, 2023. And they said 2022, 2023 are really pivotal years. And if you think it's been fast the last few years, they said, hold on to your hats this next few years. But they also said that there is a critical mass in that period of time that's going to be really important. And so they said, roll up your sleeves and enjoy so much of the journey in the next few years as well, because there is going to be very evident joy, connection, love, and a new level of that frequency on Earth in amidst the things that might be falling apart or changing at rapid speed or bewildering people. So that was very fresh. That was a couple of years ago. I never heard them refer to that marker point in time, but they were talking about humanity's awakening in those 2 years specifically, and how so much of this is building toward it. And that if these things weren't happening, we wouldn't get there.
Lee, I love first of all, I love again the sound, the tone of your voice. It's so calming and you're so clear when you speak. It's beautiful to hear your wisdom. I'm curious now, is there a special way that you prepare? Is there a special way, do you have a special discipline that you prepare to quiet and come deep inside yourself to hear the voices, to hear your guides? Is there something you might share with the viewers that could be also something they can integrate in their own lives?
It's a good question. Well, how I prepared this morning was I went down to the lobby to get coffee, and I came back up and I laptop in place. No, I mean, I'm teasing, but I'm also not teasing. I mean, honestly.
You're talking to a classical musician who has a life of a quite a disciplined routine.
It's so funny. I tell you, the one thing that is imperative for me that I've learned is I need to be alone for the 10 minutes before I start anything like this. And if I'm not, it stresses me, because what happens is I start to open my field a bit more than I would if I was just, going about my own day, or doing more, action-based mundane things, I guess. And so if there's someone else in the room, when I'm starting to do that, I start picking up on them. So my husband, Stephen, for example, I've learned that I have to kick him out of a room that I'm going to do a broadcast. He'll sit there quietly until like the last minute, and I'm like, no, I need you. You have to go, because otherwise I'll start picking up on what's going on in you, and that's not what my job is. So that would be the main thing. But no, I don't have a set of practices, and I have to say, perhaps because of that, I'm a big advocate of getting people to channel like that. In my workshops, I invite everybody to channel for themselves. And normally they look horrified, the people who've never done it in the first moment, when I say, now you're going to channel for yourself. And then hilariously, after we play some music and I give them 5 minutes and we give them all pen and paper, and they just sit there, and I say it like this, because I'll share this with you who are watching if you've never channeled for yourself before. When you get the pen and paper, or the keyboard if you want to use a computer, you simply say, I would like to hear a message from my higher self, the wisest part of my mind, God, my guide. It doesn't matter, because people get very hung up on that. They're like, well, how do I know if this is a guide? And I couldn't be more disinterested in where the energy is coming from. For me, the truth of the energy is felt. It's like, I don't need to know how the composer put together the piece of orchestral music that is running through my body, like giving me an energetic symphony in my body. I might be interested in that later, because I might want to learn something for music production, but in the moment, I just feel the truth of the symphony. And that's how we should approach channeling. So many people will never ever have a guide that they identify, but there's a wise voice inside you that's beyond this level of our perception. So you sit and you write, I would like to ask my guide, loved one, the wisest part of myself, God, Jesus, whoever you identify with, message today for my highest good. And then you just start writing. And you write what you hear, and you don't stop to question, am I making this up? Yes, you're making it up, because you're the one writing. So yes, there is an act of making it. If you weren't doing it, it wouldn't be happening. So yes, don't worry about it. Let it flow, and then read it. Because I began as a channeler on the London Underground, which is the tube train, on my way to work. And my biggest problem in the early months of channeling was my belief that I should have been at Hogwarts, or on a mountain in Tibet, or somebody should have knighted me. Honestly, I mean, really, because I had a lot of reverence and respect for metaphysics. I really did. So I thought, no, that I must be making this up, because it was too easy. It just happened. And of course, now I look back in the years leading up to it, and I see there were these primers that were happening to me, but I didn't understand. And my message is that the voice of wisdom is there for us. Not everybody aligns with language the way I align with language, so therefore it won't always be words for some people. For other people, it will be dance that lets them feel their wisdom. For some, it will be singing wordless chants, or chants that are in a language that isn't theirs. But I believe we can all channel, and I've had rooms of hundreds of people sat there all together channeling, and not one of them at the end has gone, oh no, I couldn't do it, which fascinates me. Because I didn't know if that experiment would work when I started doing it 2 or 3 years ago. And lo and behold, it proves to me that there is always something higher available to all of us. And while I'm sure that meditating, and I've done the 30-day juice-only cleanse, I've done many different things, and those things definitely contributed to my experience of frequency, but you can channel like that once you learn to direct your attention. And so I always say, the pen and paper or the keyboard is a great way to get into the rhythm of being able to access your higher mind, because when you bring it onto the page or onto the computer screen, you get to look back at it afterwards and see what that message was, which is very different to walking down the street, talking to your instinct, and then trying to remember what your instinct said. It can become amorphous. You don't remember it quite correctly. But when you have it written down and you check it 3 days later, you're like, oh, wow, that was Monday. And lo and behold, the last 2 days have been a bit like this. That was really helpful. That was what convinced me, because I would ask them lots of questions about my life and things going on that I was seeing around me, and what they were saying, if I went back and read it over time, would tally. So I invite anybody watching to try this now. As soon as this interview is over, just grab a pen and paper, go through the list of, or if you already know that God or Jesus is your alignment, or your guides are your alignment, and just write, what would my soul like me to hear today? And if you do that at least a few times a week, it will blow your mind when you look back at it over the coming weeks, and you'll start to see a pattern and an arc. And the gift of it is you may choose not to channel. I don't channel every day. Sometimes I'm living the experience. Sometimes I'll go 2 weeks without channeling for myself, but I know it's always there. So I know I have the choice, and I know that in a minute I can just connect to it. And I think that's really important for all of us to know.
I love what you said, that there's always something higher available, and actually that something higher is us. Yeah. And back to the title of our talk, the sound of the soul. For me, it's that. That's for you?
It's funny, as you ask me that question, I feel like the sound of our soul is if we could see like a time-lapse version of our life. If we live 60 years, 90 years, 100 years, if we could watch a time lapse of that lasts, say, 3 minutes, and we could watch the sound waves, I feel like we'd see the sound of our soul, and that across our life we're playing this symphony, and we're part of an orchestra that's also playing a symphony. And yeah, that's what comes to me, just the idea that the sound of the soul is this journey as well as this moment. And I feel like we get better at playing our instrument the longer we live. That should be the true opportunity for all of us, that we more aligned to the sound that we are. Yeah.
Lee, has there been a moment in your life where music or sound or vibration has really been a pivotal experience, besides what you described at in your early 20s when the first real song channeled through you? Is there another moment in your life that you can share with us?
Trying to think now for a specific example.
And I know you've said that you're beginning to integrate more and more music, and your own composing is.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you. There's two things then I'll say. I have used specific songs to move emotion. So I would play a song on a loop. I would have it on my headphones and I would play it for 2 hours, like a 4-minute, 5-minute song. I would just have it on a loop. Yeah. And it was almost like conducting my own healing session, because that song and that singer and the vibration of what they were focusing on was just what I needed at that time. And then the other more recent experience I had was Devor and I just created this piece called This Is the Voice. Mm-hmm. And yes. Thank you. And it was about 4 weeks ago. We were about to go to Costa Rica, and I knew I had to do a channel on feminine energy, and feminine energy rising, the channel is called. And this happens to me a lot now. If we're going to create music to go with the channel, I have to do the music first. I can't do the channel until the music has come. And so I created the mantra, This Is the Voice, within, I don't know, a minute and a half. The melody and the lyrics were just straight through. And then I sent Devor all of the vocals, and then he and I discussed what needed to kind of be orchestrated in there. And we went back and forth for a few days. We should have been doing something else. We both should have been doing other things, because we were about to go to Costa Rica and run a workshop, but this thing consumed us. And we spent a week or so on it, back and forth on the mixes. And then it had to be done because we were about to fly to Costa Rica and perform live. And I heard it on the plane on the way to Costa Rica, and it impacted me because you know this, Geraldine, when you, and anybody who's a musician, when you can't work on something anymore, you hear it for the first time, because you can no longer think, oh, a bit more violin here. Oh, we need to take the sound that, you can't interfere anymore. So you just hear it as a listener. And what I felt in that moment was the future of the music that we're creating. I had one of those moments where it was like, oh, this is a flag in the ground. This song is like a flag in the ground for the future of what Devor and I are doing. And I felt that. But I knew that the energy that had come through that song was us turning a corner with the kind of music that we're producing. And I'll go back to something I said to you, Geraldine, when we had a chat before we came on air. I'm fascinated by how many of us, so I think of you and your opera voice and your opera career, and how you're now bringing that into the healing fields. I have so many friends who are sound healers and musicians in this field who either had another career in what we would call the older music industry, or the current music industry too, or wanted one and couldn't quite make it work. And then this music was actually meant to be coming through these vibrations in these fields instead. And it's quite beautiful to both experience that, but also see that with so many friends and yourself too. And I'm like, oh, this is fascinating. The music is universal, but the clothing that we're putting around this music is a different kind of new energy.
Well, and it's the recognition that now when I stand up and I guess I call it channeling in a certain way, a connection heaven earth, a connection with my son, a connection with the vibration, the high vibrational frequency of the bowls, that there's so much joy that comes through. It's so easy. And I recognize that my whole career on Broadway and as an opera singer has prepared me for this. So it's easy to stand rooted in that experience and sing in a whole different way, or play music in a whole different way. There's so much joy in it, Lee. And I'm thinking also when you were saying, when I was going through really the hard times, first of my divorce, of a 25-year marriage, and then the loss of my son, I would play Deva's Mula Mantra, and I'd just put it on repeat, and it would be 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, and that would just be, it was like that music was washing and cleaning. Or I'd put on Kevin James, who's also on our series, and I love Kevin's music. There's a connection to the earth with his music. There's something that's very, also just extremely healing. And I'd play his albums again and again and again and again, because it puts you, one of the themes with David Matten's talk is music and mantra as medicine. And that's part of what I wanted to be able to communicate in this series, was to open perhaps to people this thing that maybe it's not as conscious as it could be, that really music is medicine. Mantra is medicine.
So true. And your joy when you play and when you sing is so evident. And also I shared with you earlier too that yesterday I listened to your piece, the flute and the bowl piece that you released just a few weeks ago, and I had it playing in this room. I think it was almost an hour long, maybe, and it was a bath. It was I felt the cleansing of me in the room, and so absolutely, it is incredible what it can do. And it's interesting because you asked me, do I have any practices before I do this kind of work, especially when I do live events. I will usually play devotional music before, devotional music or instrumental music. So Robert Gass was someone I would play for a long time. Snatam Kaur I would play a lot too. I have various friends who produce sound healing music, so I will put on their music before I go into a room, because it's like a frequency airlock.
It elevates you. You're elevated. You're elevated but grounded at the same time.
And there's that quote from Nietzsche, without music, life would be a mistake. And oh boy, do I think that is the truth. I was like, without music, I don't know if I'd want to have come down here.
Agreed. And I love also that quote that says, music is love in search of a word. For me, there's so much love present in music.
Oh, that's lovely. I've never heard that before.
I found that somewhere and used it for my very first classical recital when I was 19. Yeah. Lee, thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our viewers before we complete today? It's been amazing to share conversation, and your clarity and your wisdom is a gift. I'm grateful to call you friend, and I'm grateful that you're in the world doing what you're doing. So needed.
Thank you. And can I just say likewise, thank you for having me here, and thank you for doing this, because as soon as you said you were doing it, I was so excited that it was about sound and about music, having done a lot of energy medicine themed work over the years. But any clarity and wisdom I have now, in a way, must have been hard won, because I certainly was not somebody who felt that truth about myself a long time ago. And like all of us, was trying to figure it out. And still today, of course, you figure it out. But I think what I would love to share on that note is, I know there will be many people who are partaking in this series, this experience, who are already doing this work in the world. But if any of you think that you are, I don't like this term, but an audience member to this work, or somebody who is just here to see what you can get for your personal life, I doubt that's true. Because I think I, like many others, were going to lots of workshops and didn't realize I was studying for my job. Because I thought this was my pastime, my hobby. My hobby was personal growth and spirituality, and it was what I did on the side. So I just would like to say to any of you watching who get lit up around this kind of work or this kind of energy, but haven't yet made it work, or can't quite imagine that this might be your field in the future, unless you very clearly know that you don't want it to be your work, I would get curious about that, because I see so many people changing and transforming so fast, and I see more and more people needing people who can hold space in this way for this field. So that just comes to me intuitively, that there's probably a lot of people tuned into this thinking they're here as more of an observer participant, but actually I suspect there's a lot of you who are going to be way showers in this field, and all that involves is showing up and offering what you can, and you go through all the ups and downs of, am I good enough? Do I know enough? You go through all that garbage that we all go through, because it's the human stuff. But kind of like you were saying, Geraldine, the joy of showing up, and the joy of, whatever fear you have before you walk onto the stage or before you go into the one-on-one session dissipates, because there is an elevation. And sometimes that contraction or that fear is in direct proportion to the expansion that you and the other people are about to experience together. So yeah, I invite you to get curious, if you're watching, about what you might be doing in this field or fields like this in the coming years, because I suspect many of you will be.
I know Jonathan Goldman's talk was about you are your own sound healer, and that all of us have the capabilities. Also what you're sharing, it's we're being called. We're being called.
We are. Well, thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on this. I think it's fantastic. And
Lee, guess what? Yeah. We are going to make a live event out of this. And so next November 2019 in Los Angeles. Fantastic. I hope I'm going to see you there.
I will be there. I'm going to mark the date down as soon as we get off this call.
Thank you, dear. Thank you for your time, for your energy, for your love, for your wisdom, for your clarity. And may you be blessed, and all the viewers, may we be blessed. Today is Thanksgiving. We are taping on Thanksgiving, and so it's a day of gratitude, a day of light, a day of thankfulness. So
thank you.